The man who made America laugh for 40 years just stood in his garage, looked into a camera, and didn't tell a single joke. No punchline, no famous grin, just silence, heavy breathing, and words that made Hollywood stop cold. Jay Leno, the king of late-night television, the man who survived third-degree burns and a motorcycle crash that shattered his bones, finally broke. And what he revealed in that moment has left millions wondering if they ever really knew him at all. This isn't a story about retirement. This isn't a story about cars or comedy or ratings wars. This is the story of a man who spent his entire life running from silence and finally learned how to embrace it. Stay until the end, because his final words will change how you see your own journey. The accidents that changed everything. For 3 decades, Jay Leno was untouchable. From the moment he took over The Tonight Show desk in 1992 until his final bow in 2014, he represented something rare in television: consistency, warmth, and a work ethic that bordered on obsession. The man didn't take vacations. He performed stand-up on weekends, even while hosting 5 nights a week. He built a car collection worth over $100 million, housing an estimated 180 cars and 160 motorcycles in his famous Burbank garage near Hollywood Burbank Airport. Every single vehicle was maintained with current insurance, registration, and a full tank of gas, ready to drive at any moment. That obsessive attention to detail made him a legend among car enthusiasts. But what the cameras never captured was the price he paid for that relentless drive, and what happened behind closed doors after 2 near-fatal accidents changed him in ways nobody could have predicted. It started on November 12th, 2022. Jay was in his garage doing what he loved most, working underneath a 1907 white steam car with his friend Dave Kalaki. The fuel line had become clogged, and Jay was trying to fix it. He asked Dave to blow some air through the line to clear the blockage. Then suddenly, boom! Gasoline sprayed directly onto Jay's face. The pilot light from the steam car jumped, and in an instant, his face caught fire. Dave reacted immediately, pulling Jay out from under the vehicle and throwing himself on top of his friend to smother the flames. Without that split-second response, the outcome could have been catastrophic. The Burbank Fire Department responded to the emergency call at 12:28 p.m., rushing Jay first to a local hospital before transferring him to the Grossman Burn Center in Los Angeles. The 72-year-old former Tonight Show host had serious burns to his hands and chest, and third-degree burns to his face. Dr. Peter Grossman later revealed that the burns covered approximately 7% of his body. The combination of gasoline chemicals and fire had created deep second-degree and possibly third-degree burns that required immediate surgery. Jay underwent procedures to excise and debride damaged tissue, removing infected areas and dead cells to help the severe burns heal properly. Doctors used temporary skin grafts from human cadaver skin as part of his treatment. He also received hyperbaric oxygen therapy, a high-pressure treatment that accelerates burn wound healing. For 10 days, one of television's most recognizable faces lay in a hospital bed, his features covered in bandages, his future uncertain. When Jay finally released a statement, he delivered it with the same understated humor that had defined his career. He said he got some serious burns from a gasoline fire, that he was okay, and just needed a week or 2 to get back on his feet. Classic Leno, making light of something terrifying. What stunned everyone was how quickly he returned to work. Just days after being released from the burn center, Jay performed a sold-out show at the Comedy and Magic Club in California. He walked on stage with his face still visibly healing and opened with a joke that captured his entire philosophy on life. He said he never thought of himself as a roast comic, then added that they had 2 shows tonight, regular and extra crispy. The audience laughed through tears. Here was a man who had nearly died, standing on stage making jokes about his own near-death experience because that's who Jay Leno was. He didn't stop. He couldn't stop, but the universe wasn't finished testing him. Just 2 months later, on January 17, 2023, while the burns were still healing, Jay was testing a 1940 Indian motorcycle when he noticed the smell of leaking gasoline. He turned down a side street and cut through a parking lot to investigate. Unbeknownst to him, someone had strung a wire across the parking lot with no flag hanging from it. Jay didn't see it until it was too late. The wire clotheslined him, knocking him off the bike and sending him crashing to the ground. He broke a collarbone, 2 ribs, and cracked both kneecaps. When asked about the incident, Jay responded with typical dark humor. He said it was a 72-year-old guy driving an 83-year-old motorcycle. So what could really happen? He joked that after getting burned up, you get that one for free. But after that, you're Harrison Ford crashing airplanes, and you just want to keep your head down. The scars healed on the outside, but something inside him had fundamentally shifted. The man who once seemed invincible was beginning to face his own mortality. The heartbreak he kept hidden from the world. But while Jay was battling his own physical demons, something far more devastating was happening at home. Something he protected from the public eye for as long as he possibly could. His wife Mavis, the woman he had loved for nearly 5 decades, was slipping away. Not from an accident. Not from something he could fix with tools and determination. She was disappearing into the fog of dementia, and there was nothing Jay Leno could do to stop it. Their love story had always been unconventional. Jay and Mavis met in the 1970s at the famed Los Angeles comedy club The Comedy Store, where the young comedian was scheduled to do stand-up. Mavis saw him perform and later recalled thinking he was the most gorgeous man she had ever seen. When she came out of the bathroom backstage, Jay approached her and asked if she was that girl sitting in front. She said yes, and something clicked between them that would last a lifetime. Jay admittedly wasn't very good at dating, and Mavis had always believed she would never get married. She was a fierce feminist who had made peace with a life of independence. But Jay changed everything. Mavis told People magazine in 1987 that with Jay, she began to realize it was the first time she was ever with someone where she had a perfect, calm sense of having arrived at her destination. Their engagement was as unconventional as their relationship. There was no diamond ring. Instead, Jay proposed an insurance policy, explaining that if something happened to him, his girlfriend wouldn't be covered, but if they were married, she would be. Not the most romantic gesture by traditional standards, but Mavis understood. That was Jay, practical, protective, and devoted in ways that didn't require grand gestures. They married on November 3, 1980, a date chosen because it was also Jay's parents' wedding anniversary. Mavis was crazy about her in-laws, and the connection to family made the date even more meaningful. They chose not to have children, a decision Mavis made when she was young after watching television shows that portrayed wives as burdens to their husbands. Instead, they built a life focused entirely on each other. For over 4 decades, Mavis stood beside Jay through every triumph and struggle. She was fiercely independent, a philanthropist and activist who was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize in 2002 for her work supporting women in Afghanistan under the Taliban. She led the Feminist Majority Foundation's campaign to stop gender apartheid in Afghanistan since 1997, and together with Jay, donated $100,000 to further the cause. But somewhere along the way, the woman who had changed the world began to lose herself. According to court documents filed in January 2024, Mavis had been progressively losing capacity and orientation to space and time for several years. Her neurologist, Dr. Hart Cohen, had been treating her since a car accident in 2018. The decline was gradual at first, then impossible to ignore. According to the doctor, Jay waited to bring the matter public out of respect for his wife. He protected her dignity as long as he could, but eventually, he had to face reality. In April 2024, Jay Leno was granted conservatorship over his wife's estate following her diagnosis of advanced dementia. The news shocked fans who had no idea Mavis was struggling. Court documents revealed the heartbreaking extent of her condition. According to a filing by her court-appointed counsel, Mavis sometimes does not know her husband Jay, nor her date of birth. She has a lot of disorientation and will ruminate about her parents, who have both passed, including her mother, who died about 20 years ago. That last detail would prove to be the most devastating of all. Jay later revealed that probably the toughest part was every day she'd wake up and realize someone had called to tell her that her mother had passed away. And her mother died every day for like 3 years. Every single morning, Mavis experienced the grief of losing her mother, as if it were the first time. Fresh pain, fresh tears, fresh devastation. And Jay was there for every moment of it, holding her through a loss that never stopped repeating itself. That was really tricky, he admitted. That makes it hard. Yet even in describing this unimaginable pain, Jay refused to cast himself as a victim. He explained that he enjoys the time with his wife, that if he goes home, he cooks dinner for her, watches TV, and it's okay. It's basically what they did before, except now he has to feed her and do all those things. But I like it, he said. I like taking care of her. She's a very independent woman, so I like that I'm needed. The man who spent 40 years being needed by millions of viewers had found something more meaningful. Being needed by one person. The only person who truly mattered. He uses flashcards to help Mavis remember their life together, holding up pictures and asking if she remembers. Even in those sessions, he finds ways to make her laugh. He calls it Jay and Mavis at the prom, dancing back and forth like teenagers at their first dance. She thinks that's funny. And when she looks at him and smiles and says she loves him, he melts. Because despite everything, the connection remains. The love that sparked in a comedy club 50 years ago still burns, even through the fog of a disease that steals memories. Jay told interviewers that the idea that you get married and take these vows, nobody ever thinks they'll be called upon to act on them. You know that part, for better or worse. But even the worse is not that bad. He said he was glad he didn't cut and run. Glad he didn't run off with some woman half his age or any of that silly nonsense. I would rather be with her than doing something else. That single sentence reveals more about Jay Leno than 40 years of television ever could. The announcement that silenced Hollywood. The announcement came without warning. No press release, no publicist. Just Jay in his garage, surrounded by the machines he'd spent a lifetime restoring, speaking directly to the camera with a heaviness in his voice that fans had never heard before. He looked older somehow, not just in years, but in spirit. The sparkle that once defined his presence had dimmed into something more contemplative, more fragile. When he opened his mouth, the words came slowly, deliberately, like a man who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his head, and still wasn't sure he could get through it. He began by saying he'd lived a blessed life. Simple words that carried decades of gratitude and regret intertwined. Then he said, "There comes a time when you have to be honest with yourself and with everyone who supported you." The camera held steady on his face, as vintage headlights reflected off the walls behind him, creating an almost sacred atmosphere in that garage where he'd found so much peace over the years. For a man who built his entire career on deflecting pain with humor, this was something entirely different. This was Jay Leno, stripped of his armor, standing vulnerable before the world he'd entertained for so long. During the broadcast, Jay glanced at the cars surrounding him and said something that broke hearts across the country. He said, "You can't take your garage with you." Those 7 words contained a lifetime of realization. Here was a man who had spent decades acquiring, restoring, and cherishing these machines, finally acknowledging that none of it follows you when the road ends. He talked about family, about legacy, about peace. Concepts that had always taken a back seat to work, and ambition suddenly moved to the front of his mind. His wife Mavis had been urging him to slow down for years, especially after the accidents. Those near-death experiences combined with watching the woman he loved slip away changed everything. The man once driven purely by work and adrenaline had transformed into someone focused entirely on gratitude and closure. Then came the moment that stopped everyone cold. Jay paused, took a breath that seemed to carry the weight of his entire career, and said he'd decided it was time to let go. The words hung in the air like smoke. Viewers watching the live stream couldn't process what they were hearing. Jay Leno, the man who defined an era, who outlasted every rival, who returned to work with burns still healing on his face, was announcing his complete withdrawal from public life. Not just retirement from television, which he'd technically done years ago, but a total departure from everything. No more car shows, no more comedy clubs, no more cameras. The man who had spent 40 years in the spotlight was choosing to disappear into the quiet he'd always avoided. He was going home to be with Mavis. Nothing else mattered anymore. What made the announcement even more stunning was how he planned to say goodbye. There would be no farewell tour, no final special, no victory lap around the country collecting standing ovations. Instead, Jay revealed he was donating a major portion of his legendary car collection to a foundation supporting young mechanics and engineers. Vehicles worth millions of dollars, some irreplaceable pieces of automotive history, would be given away to inspire the next generation. He said these cars gave him purpose, but they deserve to inspire others rather than collect dust behind locked doors. Friends confirmed the decision didn't come easy. That garage was his sanctuary, his museum, his entire identity wrapped into one space. Giving it up symbolized the closing of a chapter that had defined his existence for longer than most careers last. But Jay had found something more valuable than metal and horsepower. He had found purpose in presence, in simply being there. The last ride, his final gift to the world. Just when viewers thought the broadcast had delivered its final blow, Jay hinted at something unexpected. He mentioned one last project he needed to finish before stepping away for good. That single line ignited speculation across the entertainment world. What could this final project be, and why was he keeping it secret? The answer emerged slowly over the following weeks, as insiders began to reveal details. Jay had been secretly filming a deeply personal documentary, not about cars or comedy, but about life after the spotlight. For months, cameras had followed him through his home and garage, capturing unfiltered moments of reflection, mechanical work, and heartfelt conversations with the people who shaped his journey. Gone were the studio lights and rehearsed punchlines. This was just Jay, his tools, and the unvarnished truth. The documentary, reportedly titled The Last Ride, follows him as he restores one final car. Not just any car, but the very first one he ever purchased before fame found him. A 1934 Ford that represented everything he was before The Tonight Show changed his life. Jay explained, "It's not about horsepower anymore, it's about closure." Each episode chronicles a piece of his past, from the struggling days as a young comic sleeping in his car to survive, through the glory years when late-night television made him a household name, to the present moment, where he's learning how to stop moving for the first time in his adult life. The footage includes scenes from his burn recovery that he kept hidden from the public, the grueling rehabilitation, the moments of doubt, the physical agony that humor couldn't mask. But the most powerful moments feature Mavis. The cameras capture Jay cooking dinner for her, holding up flashcards, dancing with her to the bathroom like they're teenagers at prom. It's raw and emotional in ways that feel completely removed from the polished image he maintained throughout his career. One producer described it as watching a man learn how to stop, and somehow it still makes you laugh. Because even in the darkest moments, Jay finds ways to bring light. That's who he's always been. That's who he'll always be. In one of the most emotional sequences, Jay returns to the exact spot in his garage where the fire started. He stands near the same 1907 white steam car that nearly killed him, the vehicle he was working on when gasoline sprayed across his face and ignited. Instead of anger or bitterness, he simply smiles and says, "You can't love something without risking it." And that's true for cars and for life. Those who've seen the footage describe it as haunting yet strangely peaceful. The camera captures a man who no longer fears endings. He polishes the same car that burned him as though forgiving the past itself, transforming trauma into something approaching grace. The film also pays tribute to his beginnings. Jay visits the comedy clubs where he got his start, including the Comedy Store, where he first met Mavis all those years ago. He talks to young performers who remind him of himself in the 1970s. Hungry, nervous, and full of dreams they barely dare to speak aloud. He offers advice that cuts through all the noise of modern entertainment. Don't chase fame, chase joy. Fame's a byproduct. Joy's the fuel. That line has already become the unofficial motto for the entire project. But it's the final 10 minutes that everyone who's seen the near-finished cut describes as pure poetry. Jay finishes restoring that 1934 Ford and takes it out for one last drive down an empty California desert road. The golden hour light reflects off the hood, while the sky turns crimson behind him. For once, he doesn't speak. Instead, his voice comes through in soft narration. He says every road ends somewhere, but if you've enjoyed the ride, that's enough. The engine roars, the horizon swallows the car, and the screen fades to black. No applause, no farewell message, just peace. Just a man who finally found what he was looking for. Not in the spotlight, not in the applause, but in the quiet moments at home, with the woman who saw him before anyone else did. Since filming Wrapped, Jay hasn't made another public appearance. Friends say he spends his days at home with Mavis, cooking her dinner, watching travel shows on YouTube because she can no longer travel herself, taking her for drives around the California coast because she still likes that. The spotlight he commanded for 4 decades has given way to something he never knew he needed. Silence. Peace. The simple pleasure of being present in his own life without an audience waiting for the next punchline. He comes home every night. When he has to travel for work, the plane waits and he flies right back. Because being there for Mavis is what matters now. That's what defines a marriage. That's what love actually means. The tributes have poured in from every corner of entertainment. Jimmy Fallon called him the blueprint of dedication. David Letterman, once his fiercest competitor, released a rare public statement saying they'd fought for years over who got the chair. But it turned out Jay was just holding it for the next generation. Jerry Seinfeld and Ellen DeGeneres spoke about how his humility shaped their own approaches to comedy. Fans began calling the documentary the goodbye America didn't know it needed. But Jay isn't watching the reviews or counting the accolades. He's too busy making flashcards, too busy cooking dinner, too busy dancing his wife to the bathroom and calling it prom night. Because that's where he belongs now. That's where he always belonged. It just took him 40 years to figure it out. In the end, Jay Leno didn't simply step away. He crossed into a truth most people spend a lifetime avoiding. A truth about love, legacy, and the moment when every road finally narrows. His silence became louder than any joke he ever told, and now the industry he left behind is beginning to tremble with questions it never wanted to face. Because when a man like Jay walks away on his own terms, it forces everyone else to confront the ending they fear. So as this chapter closes, consider the question that lingers in the shadows. If this was Jay's final act, what story is Hollywood trying to keep hidden next?